Hi, friends. Okay, so we had some technical difficulties.
Oh my god, that worked.
It worked. Excellent. Oh, great. So
Our account got censored yesterday because from Ebenezer's pictures, and then it wouldn't let me do a live video. Yeah, so Alia had to start it.
Thank you. This is good. I'm so glad it worked.
Amanda, I miss you.
Look at to see your face. Wow.
I know.
Then the
artist
gets the question box. That's the hard part.
See how
we
things
talked about that before.
So much for doing
it could depend like if the artist is okay with that, or we can just like direct people to do the comments
because
for photos.
Honestly, this has been such an interesting time, and using this platform has allowed us to talk with artists that had their shows posted.
Hilariously, we didn't even talk about the question box, and people used it instead of asking questions in the comments. So it was like totally backwards from how I know it.
We've been up to for the last couple of years.
And I thought there were like a lot more viewers than I kind of expected, considering we didn't really announce it that much.
And some, exactly.
I think that it's
so, like I was with you guys. I mean, it's been actually
an Instagram thing,
almost
announcing
exactly
it
2
right
years.
away. I mean, it's like it's the people who are online then, like they'll probably
when I showed
online in
Borderland
30
there,
minutes or so.
You guys welcomed me so much, and you actually produced
is this guy gonna come
the
in?
first book.
Which was the catalog to be able to show all of the photographs. So, and it's still going around. But there's a lot's happened since then. I finished grad school. That's a big thing. And there was a pandemic, and Steve Bannon got arrested.
I mean,
great.
It's 3:30 now. I don't know if I'm gonna move him.
Not a minute too
Maybe we
soon,
can
we'll say.
I know, exactly.
So, what do you want to talk about?
Okay, well, let's start a little
just leave
bit
it.
with
I'm on the lookout.
Since that was the show that you showed at Blue Sky with us. For just a brief explanation of that, like inception of that project and like how it took you all over the world, and kind of give us a little bit of that. But I'm mostly interested to know how that project has shifted in terms of practice, and then having gone to grad school. You were just about to start graduate school when you showed with us, so it's been like a nice little bookend. So I'm interested really to see kind of about that, and then I would love to know about what you're working on presently and your future upcoming residency and all that good stuff. So
awesome. Let's dive in. All right, so we'll start with with Borderland. I mean, Borderland was sort of one of the bigger, it was talk about such a love project, which actually was really born out of so much rage, and it was at the beginning, as we're like talking about bookends as well. It was also towards the lead up to the elections, and there was all of these, during the primaries, and when this guy who's in office at the moment was sort of kind of spreading all this bigotry. Of course, it was coming out about Muslims, about Arabs, but there was this sense at the time where, really disturbingly, I'd sort of become also desensitized to that. And noticing also all of these other communities, particularly there was this horrific thing that he'd said about Mexicans. And it started making me think, like, even Googling and seeing, okay, well, what does Google say about Mexico? What does Google say about Yemen? And just the images that come out. And the images were horrific. I'm actually speaking to you right now from Mexico. And thinking about, what's the sort of, you see these sort of brown limp bodies. I mean, if you look at sort of the Arab world, right? Yemen, Iraq, Syria, they all sort of look the same because, it's basically violence. And it was the same thing when you looked at Mexico. It wasn't about the textiles. It was about drug cartels and I wanted to shift that narrative as the elections were happening. And the best way to start was from home. And it was from Yemen, really. And thinking about my grandmother my Yemeni grandmother, who was illiterate in that she couldn't read and write Arabic and Hebrew, but she would document her stories and the myths and, everything that was happening through her textiles. And it made me think about how our narrative was written actually by our colonizers, by the British, in English, which isn't our language, so it wasn't really for us. So I ended up going to 11 different parts of the world, looking at different indigenous groups and how they communicated through their textiles, really. And that was sort of what it initially started as a project called People of Pattern, and eventually, over that year, I kind of it was more about this concept, and I got really interested in this idea of borderland, which is not only like a physical place, but you can even think about it as the experience of us who are the diaspora, right? And what does that mean to be sort of productive citizens of two places, which, anyway. So that was sort of Borderland. And Borderland, when I exhibit the work, there's 172 photographs. And people, of course, since it was a collaboration, also have this opportunity to not only look and experience or, acquire the photographs, but also acquire the textiles directly from the masters. And and that project lives on. And now it's sort of, I think those themes actually ended up also evolving and growing as I went to grad school into something that was more personal, which was focusing on Yemen.
Be more specific with Yemeni textiles specifically, photographing them?
Well, no, actually, so that was even in Borderland. In Borderland, that was the only work. One of the conditions that I set for myself was that I wanted the fabrics to be photographed with masters or people who were from the region, in the region, on the region. But I couldn't go to Yemen because now we are in the 6th year of the conflict. So going to grad school, I really wanted to see how can I approach, I think there's also this responsibility, which sometimes as artists can be a burden, especially artists of color, to kind of talk about these, about crises and like bring sort of attention to what is happening in our native countries, right? And so I approached it differently, and something textile that had become so much a part of my practice. There was sort of an unraveling, and I really focused back on image. And I started not thinking anymore about what medium, like that I was only thinking about photography, but I just allowed to see what was the content that I had, and it ended up actually manifesting into films, but still installation. So this is something that's going to be showing soon. But it was pretty intense 2 years, and a lot came out of it.
That sounds really interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about the specific video projects and how, what made you decide to move from a still image to the video process, I guess. Was it, well, I'll let you go, actually.
Yeah, I think, I think something actually going to Cal Arts, one of the reasons that I chose to do that graduate program was because the program was called Photography and Media. And in fact, when I was interviewing there, they were the work that I saw from the graduates who were kind of leaving, none of them were actually working with photography. They weren't showing photographs, but it all came from this idea of image as a language, and what does that produce? And when I did my undergrad, I actually focused on, I wanted to become a filmmaker. And I thought, how can you be a filmmaker if you don't understand how to take the single frame? And so I think that's what led me into photography. And in this regard, I thought film, it just sort of felt organic. It felt like the right thing. So the first project that I started working on was a film called Conflict is More Profitable Than Peace. So 2 years ago, on August 9th, 2018, just a month after, I was showing at Blue Sky, there was an inaccurately targeted Lockheed Martin missile that killed over 40 children on a school bus in Lahya, Yemen. And it really didn't get much attention until months later. And so, the war had been going on, but there was this urgency, and kind of acknowledging that I needed to kind of talk about it. And so I didn't really know how to start. And one of the biggest things that I was having a difficulty, especially as aesthetics are so important to me, is, you can't aestheticize war. So how do you remove it and still get, and conflict? And how do you bring it to a society, i.e. in this case, the United States, and say this place is important when many people in the United States can't even mark where Yemen is on a map, Exactly. And so I worked with two journalists, a Yemeni journalist and a journalist from the New York Times, to actually compile the names of the victims from the school bus massacre. is what it really was. Let's call it what it is, and then kind of pairing it with, who are the names of the victims, but also the names of the culprits. And when I started listing all the culprits, from our politicians to companies, it also came down to me as a taxpayer, and I chose to then focus on the weapons manufacturing companies, so Lockheed Martin, of course, Raytheon, Bay Systems, and because I didn't know what to do, I was sort of compiling all the information, because there was so limited information, which turned into a map that essentially took over my studio and kind of drew me the timelines. And I was still using thread basically to kind of tie them and connect them, any chance to use the thread. And then also doing these sort of gestural interventions with the series of photographs called Under Thread, as this like play of under threat. Also,
self-portraits that you made is that related to the?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this, and from this point, Borderland has been, and the other work that I did was really about, this question about power in terms of being concealed and revealed, and inclusion and exclusion. And in this regard, if I look at textiles as really as an object of culture, as a portrait of culture and language, then what does it mean when there's an erasure that's happening, and a systematic erasure that's happening in Yemen, where people of the diaspora who haven't been able to maybe go back, or like the next generations, what do we have to hold on to, and how do we know what's at stake? Who cares if it's being bought? Because what is there? So it's this idea. So thinking about this unraveling of that fabric, and so I wrapped my head, my face in it, and there was even moments in which there was this drowning that happened. But so throughout, and now I have these images, which are sort of like mugshots, passport photos, to this all this information, and I decided to collect them into a binder. And also, writing is a really big part of my practice, as you know. I mean, again, it's this idea of like having control of your own narrative as opposed to someone else writing it for you. And in my colonizer's language, I have to say. So, there were all these writings, and eventually this binder, which is now, I'm on my second binder. The first one is 498 pages. It just didn't feel right to get to the 500. I was like, I'll put the next two in the next one. And I made a film actually going through this binder, and thinking about other artists who've kind of done something similar. Arthur Jaffa also has his, series of like binders, which I discovered after, which is just like this magnificent archive. And instead of, also like Hito Sterl, of course, Harlan Forky, like how is it that they approach war? And I think that's it. It's about revealing. And we see so many documents that come out of the region, and when I say the region, I mean Afghanistan, Iraq, where we talk about redaction, right? The redaction of information. And in this film, I flip it where there's actually highlighting. And so there's my voice that goes over. And that's the first film.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so this is about to be installed, or about to be opening for public view, right? Next week, is that what you said?
Yeah, actually, oh my gosh, it's September next week. What?
Oh.
So it'll be opening in September at the Benton Museum at Pomona, and because we are virtual, conflict is more profitable than peace is actually going to be online for the entire exhibition, which I was quite fortunate for, that they, rather than doing it for 3 months, they actually extended it for the whole year. So this becomes this sort of resource for people to, in fact, it's the labor which I think, as a person of color, and also just as a Yemeni and as a Muslim, it's kind of like, I wish I didn't have to do it, but there is all this labor and research, and it's basically offering it and saying there's no excuse not to know about Yemen, right? So that's going to be online, and then there are three other components of the exhibition. One, which is the FLUX series, a new series that they've commissioned around. It's called the Love Series, I hope, which is what you shared on the Instagram, share, I don't know, stories. And that focuses more on this idea of how Arabic has actually been abducted from from all Arabic speakers, especially after post-September 11th, thinking about words like talib or taliban, or word madrasa. So, you can say Taliban, it's the thing that comes, it's been sort of propagandized through the media as, also, and it's been occupied as a terrorist group. Madrasa, even if you look at Google and you look at the images, it comes out to being this, a place for extremists, like Muslim extremists, to kind of train, and almost like a terrorist training camp, when really the word talib, Taliban, or taliba, is the only word we have for student, other than maybe tilmida, which is like an elementary student. And madrasa is the only word we have for school. So if I say, ana taliba fil madrasa, maybe somebody on an airplane somewhere is going to think I'm saying that I'm a terrorist at a training camp. But actually, all I'm saying is that I'm a student at a school. So, these things of like how we have to constantly reorient ourselves, right? Because of how language has been abducted. So I tried to use, for this series, which is just Hope, which is the first time I'm printing my own textiles, which has been exciting. Of course, I use neon, black light activated. Yes, please. And then I also, the first wall that actually, I was the first artist. It's a new building. The first wall that was actually had anything installed, the museum was like, it's yours. And I was like, well, I don't want it white. I'm painting all over it. So I went in and I did that. And so that will be on view. The idea is that the word that I would like to kind of reclaim Arabic so that it's not seen as this violent word, or that violent language. If there's one word that I would like non-Arabophones to be able to say, share, spread, and recognize, it would be the word for love. So that's that. And then the other one is actually what I worked on the second year of my grad project, which is called An-Najm al-Ahmar, which means the red star. And I know you like this story, so we can go over it. And it's around the film called Mahjar, which is the word for diaspora and migration, depending on which, inflections you put on.
Okay, so let's talk about the Red Star, though, because I like the way that this kind of brings together your most recent work and what you are maybe going to be working on upcoming. So would you tell us a little bit more about the Red Star and the myth that came from that?
So Yemenis, after I finished The Conflict is More Profitable Than Peace, well, not finished, I guess it's ongoing. I was kind of at a standstill because, for a year I was basically trying to understand and communicate about what was happening in Yemen, and all I could see were brown, limp bodies that looked like me and looked like people that I love and care about. And I just didn't want to continually perpetuate these images, right? And through that, I've been really fortunate to have the mentors that I work with, like Colleen Smith, Ashley Hunt, Mercedes Durame, E.J. Hill, who really kind of also opened, particularly Colleen Smith, who opened my viewpoint and really kind of dove into Afrofuturism and thinking about futurism as this sort of, that is what we do of the diaspora. We have to create our own spaces, essentially. What is that third, the other orbit? And so last summer I just spent all my time looking at futurists, also futurists of the region, who are like Larissa Sansour, who's an amazing Palestinian futurist. But the problem with this is that, when you're thinking about futurism, you really have to, especially if you're thinking about Yemeni futurism, it's about pulling from your own culture, not borrowing or taking the labor of others, right? I think, and you can be inspired by it, but how do you really?
How do you ask?
Exactly. And so, drawing from everything, from textiles, from food, and one of the ways that I did that was that I went to Brooklyn, to the two largest communities in the United States with Yemenis, which was in Brooklyn. I worked with this amazing woman who's become like a sister, Iman Ahmed, and Awad Ghazali in Detroit. And so I wanted to see what is it that we had in common other than our suffering, basically, and so of course, like, you enter the houses, it's the food, like the henna, like the bukhur, which is like incense, just the action, like the way that it felt so good. And one of the things that came up was this story about An-Najm al-Ahmar, the red star, and and once we kind of pieced them together, everybody had a different view of what that was. And the story is that Queen Balqis, Malikat Balqis, which is the queen of Sheba, Saba is what we call it, is believed to have been what is modern day Yemen and Ethiopia. And her throne was in Ma'rib, Yemen. And she was the greatest ruler of the land. And it's believed that a powerful man up north, King Solomon, wanted to meet her. And so she said, but you have to bring me a gift that's the size of my power. And so he gifted her the red star, An-Najm al-Ahmar. Fast forward, so when we're children also, this is something that your mother can tell you, like, I'll send you to the red star, or like, behave, or, it's these, and I remember Iman was saying, she grew up in the States, she's like, I always thought it was Venus, like, Awad was pretty sure that it wasn't, that it was something that was mythical. And there's something beautiful about us all Yemenis from like the time of Balqis to now into our ancestors in the future, thinking about that we all have this star that we can look at and that we can all share. Fast forward to 1997 from that point, when NASA sent the Sojourner Pathfinder, interesting that they chose this name, chose the Sojourner Pathfinder to go to Mars, 3 Yemenis tried to sue NASA for invading their inherited land, the Red Star. And so it actually came up, it comes up in The Guardian, it comes up in the BBC, in CNN from that time, like from 1997 and 1999, and it's really quite mocking about these 3, they're like tribesmen who think that they can have, and there's a lot of questionable, like, why did they, is it because of land for themselves, is it for everyone? But I thought that was a good sort of starting point, and it was just kind of this interesting, there are a lot of themes and things to think about even now in terms of what does it mean going up to Mars and thinking about other colonies, and why is it so funny that these 3 Yemeni men are saying don't occupy this land, even if it's not just the sorry?
I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, no, but just not only that it's the land, but it's even like you're even occupying our myths right now, right? You're even colonizing our myths and our histories. And so that sort of plays into this film, and that was the starting point. And I started thinking about also other myths and stories that we have. So pulling from different found footage from NASA, but also footage that I filmed when I was last in Yemen. There's a sequence where I'm going through my old neighborhood, and you finally get to see, this is which is now probably all bombed. It's 1,000-year-old city.
You've got the gallery to yourself at the moment, so let me know if you have any questions or anything. And we've got gloves out about if you want to just head to the library books or the.
But all of it is sort of drawn together by spider,
yeah, thank you.
Which we really consider baraka, which means blessing, which is also its own mythical story, but also a religious story that comes up in the Quran, that the spiders are protectors. So, and the spider's always been something, I think it actually happened at Blue Sky. We saw a spider and I was like, keep it. This means it's a blessing. Don't touch it. And yeah, so this film is going to be, now it's an installation. It'll also be on view. It'll come up as a virtual exhibition. So you'll be able to walk through it. And essentially, a part of it is also when you're thinking about the future, I also, like, my point of reference really for all of my artwork is language, because my parents are both linguists, right? And so language I've always seen as, this, I talk about this all the time, as a tool or as a weapon, and how it's been used as both. And so thinking about the future, what language would we speak? So when you walk into this room, there's actually a letter from the future that is activated also by blacklight that you walk through, and it's a language that I've been starting to build and I wouldn't say invent or create, but I guess like try to draw from Hebrew, Arabic, and ancient Sabaean. And so in this film, I also that's what I spent a lot of time this year kind of thinking about. How does it sound? And like when I first heard ancient Sabaean, it was amazing because it looks like Hebrew writing, but when you hear it, it sounds so much like Arabic, and it just felt like I could, the ends of my nerves tingled because suddenly my soul went back 3,000 years ago, which meant that it can also catapult 3,000 years forward. So so there are these, and it goes back to thinking about the beauty of of mosaics, of calligraphy. In order to think about the future, we do have to draw on our pasts, right? So yeah, that was a long.
No, I love that so much, and the connection to the celestial too is like a very, it's a pervasive world thought, because the stars have been above us, and every culture's got their myths attached to them, but the way that they play out in our daily lives and the meaning that is attached to them too is so interesting. And then the visual representation of that through photography and being able to elicit such connection to a place when it's a photograph of a person or just text, and it's like your photograph, and it's I don't know, it's really interesting to me, the connection between the two and the way that you use photography as a language. And so that's really fun. Your installations are all very specific to the site that they're being shown in, and I always really appreciated that about your work and the thought that you put into it for the visiting experience. For Blue Sky, speaking of the spider, that this is what it immediately reminded me of was I don't know what to call that. You took string and nails and you wrote out Borderland in the exhibition, and everything is all very connected and woven in. And so, does that translate then to any? Okay, actually, let me ask this question in a better way. You've done some self-portraits, but those have been maybe newer, and I'm wondering if you're using these to be a little bit more reflective personally, or is it just are you using yourself just as a tool in the photograph to convey this image?
Yeah, so there are two thoughts that you brought up there, and I actually want to talk about both of those separately. So I'll go to the first one, and when you're talking about why, the importance of a space, and I think that's for artists. I don't know, what is space? When somebody gives you a space, right? And when somebody invites you, I think that there's something quite, I don't know, a big part of my practice, if you can also see through my photographs, is that, even where I'm sitting right now on this Airbnb in Tijuana, it's everything around me is pretty much white. This is my blanket made by my mom, by the way. So I added that, but everything is white. You go online and you're on a website, everything is white. You look at paper, you look at everything. And so what does it mean to intervene and introduce color? I don't, why does that mean, and why is this the dominant color that I'm around? When, in Yemen, it wasn't the case. It was these, beautiful, adobe, mud houses that are skyscrapers, right? Some of the first skyscrapers in the world, I believe, actually the first skyscrapers. And what does that mean also to come in, growing up in where you go into mosques or where everything is in mosaics and colors, and then you come and all of that's removed. And there's something about, for me, that's really important about creating an experience, but also transporting somebody, also acknowledging that they can't fully understand it, but maybe just getting a taste of something, something that's mine, right? Because my entire life, especially coming to the States, I had to reorient and think about how I have to change my body, my manners, not eating with my hand, everything, architecture, language, presentation, and so for once, maybe creating a space that actually disorients the viewer. And I think I'm getting better at it, and pushing it kind of, I hope I'm trying to push it even more. And I think that can happen anywhere. And when when a space is kind of provided to me, I think there's so much a part of our position is to also be as artists, is to be creative with it. And I think it's not as important. Like, one is when you're seeing the work, but there's also, it's just as important when the work is taken down for the people to feel like something is missing, right? I mean, it's just like, we could just apply it to, well, here's an immigrant, here's the work, now all of this is moved, this is what it would be like without this immigrant, you know what I mean? Or without these stories, or without these colors, and so and the layering of it. And in fact, at the Benton, the show that's coming up right now, and I will say, I think that museums, not the Benton, I mean, but I think like with museums, they've actually, but I've had some in the past where artists of color or who are emerging maybe won't get the gallery, right? But they're going to get things that are kind of on the side, or they're, like, make something from this. And I kind of got used to it, and I kind of like it, because, and so now at the Benton, when they invited me, there's one space that is actually a gallery, but the other one's is the lobby, and the other one is like a hallway. And so what does it mean about thinking about these borderlands that are actually ignored only as a place of transport, right? Or like as a place of movement, but they're actually the veins that connect all the other galleries. And I'm kind of, I feel really fortunate because now at every entrance that you come into the museum, it's my work. So fine, I'll take it, and once I did that one, and they actually commissioned, they're like, just take that lobby, and that's how that story came up with like paintings, So that's one. And I think any opportunity to kind of show, why not? I do have to say, I really admire people who do public art. And that's something that I'd love to do more. I just need to understand a little bit more about that materiality and like, what does it mean, sculpture? Like, I don't know. Haven't done that yet, but I really admire that. And then I think for the second question, which you're talking about more about like the portraits, about whether or not I like photograph myself and whether or not
are they portraits, or are you considering them just like a part of a larger body of work that are not necessarily super introspective?
I mean, I've used, I don't know, I think like the first work that your hand is so much in it as an artist, right? And so like the first work anyway, like you take the photograph or like, and I guess just because it's not visible. And the first work, but for me, it's completely the photographer, the artist is the first thing. Maybe it's also because it's coming as an artist. The hand becomes so obvious in it. Is it edited? How did they prepare it? And maybe not everybody, I'm sure not everybody sees it that way. But the first series that I did, Cast No Evil, I photographed myself because I was also coming, I was new to just photography, right? Because I told you I was really working on film, and I taken some
in
time
March.
off to
This
work in arts
exhibition was
admin.
opened in March,
And
so we had to close on.
By the way, if any artists are listening, please take care of the people who don't support your
it's actually right there.
because I used to be that person, and I had some really horrible experiences with some artists.
In September.
Love your preparators.
No, it's not going to be at a reception. It's not.
I don't know. I thought, for me, coming from Yemen and also having the privilege actually of traveling to other places, I really saw how the camera was actually a weapon. People come in, they parachute. Tourists are uninvited visitors into countries, although they really support the economy. They parachute into the society, and then they want to grab the next photograph, basically. And essentially, that is why these words of like capture, and to shoot an image, which I really, I do think that there's a place where people do that, and that's why it should be used. But I really wanted to think about, how do I make images? And so the first photographs that I was doing, I was actually under the textile and also taking the photographs. So being sort of the subject and the photographer, right? Like even the word subject, right? But the observed and the observer. And as a person under the textile, I really had no power. But I was the one who was taking the picture. But also as the photographer, I didn't have power because I didn't know what I was looking at. So I just took a lot of images basically, and then out of 20 or 100, I would pick one. So, okay, I guess this works. And I really loved that process. It was kind of grueling, and then then when Borderland, when I did Borderland, I really wanted the masters to be under it. But when I came into communities, I would always, and there were different ways in which I was made introductions. I would spend 5 to 6 weeks with them, and I would always bring the camera, and I would say, these are the photographs that I would like to make, but I would like to spend, this is how much time. And then, of course, we talk about money because it's also labor that they're putting in just for time. And then also like this kind of understanding what are the stories behind or trying to. And so they would sit underneath it. And so in that regard, it was masters who were under that. And it was important because I didn't want to put somebody else's fabric on me. And so there's the people that can be contacted to purchase their own, directly to them to purchase their fabrics. But then after that, I also use, I work with friends. I mean, I think, I work with family who are under it, who are under the textiles. Like my parents are really, since I was a child, I've always dressed them up. So it's not like they're not used to it. But I think, irregardless of the fact that they're under the fabric, there's this sort of intimacy that happens between who sits for your photographs. And, Alia Ali kind of talks about this as a social contract. Like it's a contract between the two of you and, or whoever. And so I think there's a responsibility in carrying out that photograph for forever, right? It becomes as a document. And so I am quite careful about, I think, who is in it and who isn't. But actually for Under Thread, and I worked with two dear friends who helped me also because it was a different process. So it was Na Matias and Nekawal who were in my program at Cal Arts. And so you're holding. I had the thread on me, and for me it was important because it's the first time in the series that I actually revealed faces. And so it made sense that it was me. And thinking back to all of what I'm saying about Borderland, like I didn't want people in Borderland, like, why do you photograph people's faces? And I'm like, why? There's so many Steve McCurrys. Like, why? You know what I mean? Like, people are going to they're going to take these photographs and then they just, and there's this othering that happens, and it just really feels like that capturing, and we're at a different time. And, who is not being photographed is also, so I wanted to think about the textile as a way of portraying as a portrait of the culture and not looking at how somebody looks different from me, but what brilliance is it that they can create from their minds and their hands. In this regard, like for Under Thread, it worked really differently because it was more about this erasure of what's happening in Yemen. And I'm a Yemeni, so it made sense for me to be under it and thinking about what does it mean to have a green passport and a blue passport, right? And the access and the fact that
you smell smoke.
All of my family is still in Yemen, but because there we go. But I guess I can't use any profanities on here. But this guy, Steve Bannon, who was like arrested today, this is so epic to me because he was also one of the people who instigated the Muslim ban, which has Yemenis on it. So even if I wanted to bring, Yemenis, my family out, well, they have a green passport. I happen to also have a blue passport. So I have this access to be able to move, but I can't pull them, I can't bring them because they're banned. So it made sense for me thinking about those photographs as like these passport photographs, but also as a criminal, right? So from the United States perspective, as an Arab, as a Muslim, as a Yemeni, as a criminal, but also, in all honesty, as a criminal from fellow Yemenis, because I'm a taxpayer here. And so there's this tension of like, how do you negotiate that? And I don't think I have the answer yet, except to like use that rage, I guess, or use these thoughts, this research, into turning it into work.
Yeah, it is a terrible conflict to have on your shoulders, feel responsibility for, but understandable and outrageous still. And you traveled a ton in your whole life, and so this current time we're living in must be like very shocking for lots of reasons for your system, but one included is that you've had to stay kind of static in your personal being. Like, you haven't been able to travel very much recently, not to Yemen for a lot longer than this, but yeah, how is that for you? Are you able to rely a lot on like this type of video chat with your family in Yemen, or in where are your parents living now? Are they in Marrakesh?
Yeah, they're in Marrakesh. Yeah, I mean Morocco. Oof, if you haven't gone, that's it. Talk about the best people. I will just say something that you commented at the beginning. You know, you're like about whether or not it's a weight on my shoulders. You know, it's like it's not. You know, I mean, it is. It's not. But it's not. When you think about, you make it, right. So it's not something that to be turned. I just want to kind of clarify that it's just something that's a responsibility, and it's something that I think all other Yemenis, I actually posted on my Instagram stories for anyone that's listening, like if you wanted to know more about it, and I am totally going to do a plug here. You know, there are so many other Yemenis and Yemeni artists who are doing things right now in order to like draw attention to it. So there's one, Shema, who's amazing, and she along with 10 other Yemeni artists, female artists, raised about $20,000 by selling prints. And so I posted that on the Instagram. You can learn more about each of these artists. There's also Safe. Them and their family have organized. They go by Queer of Sheba, and they've organized these donations that you can kind of do through Venmo or GoFundMe to support food, because there's also a blockage of food in Yemen. So you know, people are doing it. I think we're all using our platforms in ways to kind of promote that, promote the like attention to it and how to help. And I think like in terms of travel, yeah, again, but that was something that was always really, like, it was a privilege. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I have to be honest. I think I was living in Morocco as well, and I came back to the United States after Trump was put into office.
Okay, thank you.
You know, because I wanted to participate as their U.S.
Oh wow,
citizen,
I see the smoke.
because it's,
Gosh, should I
I
move
can
my
be
car?
critical of it, and I am very critical of it.
That's awkward.
And I think coming,
Just like back up
now,
3 spots.
one of the things that it gave me, you know, coming and being, I mean, a naturalized, I guess, or becoming
Do you
a
think they would
citizen,
notice?
is that like when I travel,
Do you think any of them would notice? Like they're all
I
in their own
can
little
be
worlds. It's crazy.
evacuated. I can cross these borders through this passport. I got us, you know, scholarship.
I'm like,
to all
yeah,
the
no, nothing's
education,
different.
Scholarships to all the education that I've done, and so like, I take that as well in these two. And I think in terms of travel, you know, I don't think that one only has to travel physically. It's just been something that as a child of migrants, and that we've migrated a lot, sometimes by choice, sometimes not, that I think in this time, you know, every 3 years I sort of go on these long trips and do these projects, and a part of that is also really stepping away from this constant labor of having to reorient myself in this paradigm, right? And check people, and you know, thinking about language, and somehow removing myself from language and being in a place where it's different. So the last one was Borderland, and now I'm really excited to be going to Roswell, New Mexico, to talk about Yemeni futurism. And so Roswell Artist I'm just gonna go stargaze, look for some UFOs. So.
Forever.
I kind of forget. I don't really want to go.
But there's this amazing residency there called the Roswell Artist Residency, and I applied for it the week right before COVID. Luckily, because I guess before COVID, people are like, why would you want to go into isolation in the desert, you know, to look at stars?
Oh,
but
no,
now
no, I mean just
everybody
in
would be like, that was so maybe I just got really lucky that there was like not a lot of people.
Just like a camping fire.
So like, fine. Anyway, I was really lucky to be accepted, and so it's going to be for 1 year, you know, I'll continue this work on the language, on, you know, this language of the future. But I'm also really interested about thinking about different, a part of this last project as well. It's about different institutions, like, you know, the British Museum, or the MFA Houston, or the Smithsonian. What does it, you know, thinking about the objects, Yemeni objects and of heritage that are actually housed in these different institutions, and what does that mean for Yemenis which were stolen, abducted, if we're using that word again, and what does it mean for Yemenis, my nieces and other people who can't even leave Yemen to reconnect to their history, to Queen Balqis, to the Red Star. Not only can they not get into the country because they're banned, but then they also have to pay these museums to go and find them. So I've been kind of interested in thinking about what's the possibility of getting them back. Not that that's going to happen, but if we're talking about futurism in film, that would be awesome. So so I think I'm interested in seeing where are all these objects housed and archiving. How is it that we can have more access to them? And then we'll see what else is gonna, when you go into something, you can just have these ideas, but maybe not with too much expectation. And I think in terms of journeying, you can, that's what I was gonna say before I digress, but you can journey into other places. But there's also this moment where I think I'm excited this year, journeying into my practice, into myself, and actually allowing a lot of that to process. So I start in October, and you're coming when? You and Zemi need to absolutely come out. Yes, please.
Work-related trip, for sure.
Exactly.
No, a road trip. I mean, how can you say no? That sounds phenomenal. Also, I'm excited to see what happens with your residency. It's a lot. A year is a long time, and the fact that you're going to be there the whole time. What is the setup like? What tools are you going to have available to you at this residency? Do you know very much about are there going to be other artists with you at the same time, or are they spacing it out so that you're separate?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There's 6 artists at a time, but we rotate. I don't know because of COVID if they've lessened it. So each of us get our own house and then our own studio. And then in the sort of, they also have, I guess in the compound sounds really, I don't know, on the land. Yeah, they have a shop, so a carpentry shop, and then a photo lab, photo studio, and a ceramics. So, and then I have my own, of course I'm bringing all my textiles and my computer. I started painting, which has been really amazing. So I think that, and then they also give a stipend for material, which is rad. So that's, I think, and I think the idea is not really as much, I don't know, from what I've asked and what I've seen, it's not really as much to collaborate. I mean, they don't want you to leave for more than 6 weeks, which, I was mentioning to you on our call before, I was I can't remember the last time, more than 6 weeks in the entire year, basically. So I think they really want you to kind of really fully immerse in, and they're sort of, I'm pretty excited. I don't know, I can't answer much of that, but we should have another one of these in December. Yeah.
At least one of those weeks is going to be our road trip, so you have 5 more weeks to leave.
Exactly.
That's going to be so interesting. No, I guess I'm wondering, do you have a project? I mean, are you into more experimentation, maybe with other mediums? You just mentioned ceramics. That's just, I don't know. Textiles that seems like the thread, the ongoing thread between your works. But are you excited to experiment with other materials, or are you going to stick maybe with films and photography, photo-based work?
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's what's kind of interesting. I'm sorry, I'm seeing my friends like Suraya and Sarah. There's Suraya, you should totally do a road trip, and Sarah, we should definitely do more painting together. But I think for other materials, I don't know. I think that's actually what's been really, really amazing about being at CalArts was that it was also seeing how, we want to categorize and we want to say, what kind of an artist do you, and what do you do? And then also multimedia is a little bit too broad. I also, and I think through that, I don't know, this year I was messing around with a lot, or these past 2 years with, like with CNC and like with cedar, trying to make sculptures out of wood blocks to create, like letter blocks, as kids when we play with these sort of letters that are kind of cubes. Making that for the language of the future. So I started some of those, and then using that to actually make a wood block for the fabric, to print on the fabric. It's kind of come back to the fabric. But I also think for the film, in my photography, there's a lot of staging, and what I mean by that is that, I really kind of prepare the fabric in behind, and like, when I'm putting it on myself or on someone else, there's really a lot of preparation for that portrait, and I've been inspired by like different artists who do that, which I find really interesting. The first one that comes to mind right now is like Alia Ali, really does this and creates these sort of different futurist, she's this, the amazing cute artist, and she also like paints her face, and it kind of thinking about that even in terms of film, I'm actually quite interested in creating this portal into film and also into the photography of, how can I create other objects or like rethink about the space and then document it and include it into the film and photography. And I think that could be with anything. Like some things that I'm working with molasses right now. I'm working with henna. Just also thinking about what are some of the materials that are that came out of Yemen. So it could be anything.
Is it an export?
No. Actually, molasses is something. I was trying to think about how to work with oil, because also I was working a lot with oil, and there's also some more like thinking about what does it mean to dip things into oil, considering like when you do talk about export, that is actually like this parasitic relationship that is between, Yemen and the United States, and other parts of the region, but that's what I'll comment on now. And so, the economy of oil, and also different ways in which to represent it, and also using it, but I was also kind of interested in molasses as something that kind of represents it, but then it sort of took on its own life. But stay tuned.
I can't wait. I'm very curious how you're using material. No, that sounds very cool. Wow. Okay, we're approaching the end of our time here, I think. But so first, before we lose reception, I just want to say we're going to have a blog post with some of the images from Alia's new work that we've been talking about. And if you've been able to really see what you are, you've been seeing it on Instagram. So stay tuned for that. And thank you, Alia, for doing that. What else? What should we talk about now? How are you?
But I also wanted to say thank you so much. This was my first live, and thank you for everybody who joined. It's so nice to see friends and family who have picked up. Thank you. And just, I don't know, I think this is just really important right now. I've been looking at how, in fact, even during COVID, it's kind of bizarre how now, we talk about this, how you can actually have more access. This was actually petrifying before I got on here, but you made it so calm. I love you, Amanda. And I think it's just because you also, you can't see your audience, you're not making this contact, but you actually have a farther reach. It's almost like a twist of my photographs, it's like you see, but you can't, you don't know seeing. So, anyway, so I think, I appreciated breaking the water together and breaking the ice, I guess. And I don't know. I hope people stay safe, stay connected, and think about. And I'd really appreciate it if you look through the stories as well and see basically how you can learn more about Yemen and also other Yemeni artists who are doing so many incredible things.
It's hard to stay on top. Seemingly, sometimes overwhelming to stay on top of all of the issues that need all over the world, and so it's important. The work of artists is like critical to that understanding and that comprehension. So thank you for making the work that brings attention to these things. And I hope you can go to Yemen soon. I hope that we can travel again all soon, and I'll road trip to you. So we'll see you.
Absolutely. You'll dive into my new world.
Well, we have a couple more minutes. So, Tijuana, are you on vacay? Are you working? Why are you down there?
Well, I came down here honestly because I was living in LA, and so we ended up having just like my rent ran out. And me and my roommate, who's also one of my best friends, we were like, okay, let's think about something. And she's a doctor, and she's actually working with the Refugee Health Alliance. And so I said, all right, I'll come down with you, and I can work on stuff. But I've actually not been working. I've been reading a lot and watching stuff. I've been spending time by the beach. I've been writing. And just kind of, I think sometimes it's important, especially as artists, we feel like, it's not a job. It's a lifestyle. It's like a life. You're constantly thinking, but there's also something really important in pausing and paying attention to, your relationships, like people that you love and can connect back, because I think after grad school, I'm so grateful for people who had the patience to actually, or still in my life. So there's some processing that's coming into that, and also preparing to just go into the residency, and then I'll be going to New Orleans. So I still have an exhibition. It's the FLUX series that's showing there at the New Orleans Museum of Art, and I need to produce some work there. And then I go to Roswell, so we'll see. And I do have a question, because here it seems to be, because we're doing it on mine, right, because of the glitch, but there's a question, so do I need to pull?
Since yours, I can't see it, unfortunately, so yeah, that's the one bad thing about that glitch.
Oh, here. Okay, so we have Soraya Shaheen. Where does your love of neon come from?
Okay, cool.
Soraya. Okay, and then there's another question. Oh, I don't know how to say that. I can't read the whole thing from Mohammed Kilito. I don't know. I can't read the whole thing. I'm sorry, guys. This is the first time I've done Instagram Live. Okay, so I don't know. Where's my love for
neon?
Why not? I don't know. I'm in love with light. I love how neon looks so, I don't know, it's one thing in the day and it's another thing at night, and it's still the same. There's this sort of playfulness, and I think it really can actually be activated beautifully in exhibitions, particularly in the exhibitions that I'm doing at the Benton, and they work differently. So I actually ended up using sort of red and blue, these complementary colors, because I really love when your eyes vibrate. There's this, again, it comes back to this disorientation, and in one case where you see it all as one image, but suddenly, and you see these figures underneath, so the people, but once it's activated by black light, there's this sort of disappearance and other things reveal themselves. And I like that there's this life, and I think that's probably something consistent. I've always been in love with light and with colors. And I only really worked with, in these two, I actually used the same materials, so the one that's, the outside, the lobby, the love series, and then also the writing of the language and the mahjar and the red star and the installation of Najm al-Ahmar, the red star. But one of them is activated by black light and the other one isn't, and they are completely different experiences. So I think that also goes to kind of suggest or play with how, thinking even about the sort of code switching, right, that you have to do between two cultures, and what is it, what certain people see you in one light and certain people see you in another light, and what are the shifts that you have to do, or when you're changing language, when you're changing your surroundings, your context. And I think that's also applicable to the materials, you can have that conversation around the materials. But Soraya, I can make you a shirt with love and neon, just because you said that. So but yeah, so that's my love for neon, and I'm really sorry comment. He sent